Mikhail Tal, the magician from Riga, once said, "You must take your opponent into a deep, dark forest where 2 + 2 = 5, and the path leading out is only wide enough for one." Today we explore the most thrilling and terrifying concept in Grandmaster chess, the intuitive sacrifice. These are sacrifices that cannot be fully calculated. The player gives up material not because they can see a forced win, but because their instinct tells them that the resulting position, with its explosive activity, relentless initiative, and exposed enemy king, must be winning. This is chess at its most creative and most human. Welcome to the edge of calculation. In this position, White has a natural-looking setup with pressure against Black's kingside. But nothing concrete is available through pure calculation. No forced checkmate. No sequence that wins material back. And yet, the strongest move here might be a piece sacrifice. Consider knight takes e5. White gives up a knight for a pawn. That's objectively a terrible deal. But look at what White gets in return. The pawn on e5 disappears, opening the position. The queen on g4 stares directly at g7. The bishop on c1 can come to h6 with devastating effect. The rook on e1 suddenly has an open e-file. White's entire army comes alive. Can White calculate a forced win? No. The resulting position is too complex. There are too many branches, too many possible defenses. But White can evaluate the compensation. 3 pieces aimed at the king. An open position. An exposed monarch with limited defenders. This is where intuition takes over. The experienced player recognizes that this type of compensation, massive piece activity against a weakened king, is almost always sufficient. They don't need to see the checkmate. They need to trust the pattern. Mikhail Tal became the youngest world champion in 1960 at age 23, and his style remains the most exciting in chess history. Tal's philosophy was radical. In complex positions, the attacker has the advantage because they only need to find one winning continuation, while the defender must refute every threat. Look at this position. White has sacrificed a knight somewhere in the previous play and now has a queen on f7 and a bishop on c4, both aiming at Black's king on h8. Black has extra material, but their pieces are tangled and uncoordinated. The king is cramped in the corner. Can White calculate a forced win? Maybe not. But look at Black's task. They must defend f7, g7, the back rank, the a2 g8 diagonal, and potential queen infiltrations on the 8th rank. Every single move must be precise. One mistake and the attack crashes through. Tal understood something profound. In practice, the defender's task in a sharp position is much harder than the attacker's. The attacker makes threats. The defender must answer all of them. Even if the sacrifice is technically unsound, if the resulting position requires 20 perfect defensive moves, the defender will almost certainly fail. This is the deep dark forest, a position so complex that the player who created it has the advantage simply because they chose to enter it. How do you decide whether to play an intuitive sacrifice? You evaluate 4 types of compensation. First, initiative. Does the sacrifice let you dictate play? If every move you make is a threat, and your opponent must react to each one, you have the initiative. An initiative is worth material because the defender never gets to execute their own plans. Second, piece activity. After the sacrifice, are your pieces on strong squares? Are they coordinated? Do they work together to create threats? A sacrifice that activates 3 or 4 pieces simultaneously is often sound even if the immediate material count looks bad. Third, king safety. Is the enemy king exposed? Have you stripped away the pawn shelter? A king without a pawn shield is worth at least a pawn of compensation, often more. Fourth, pawn structure. Has the sacrifice damaged the opponent's pawn structure? Doubled pawns, isolated pawns, and holes in the position create long-term weaknesses that persist even if the immediate attack fades. In this position, White might sacrifice a piece on e5 to open the position. The compensation would include bishop on b3 becoming a monster on the open diagonal, queen on c2 joining the attack, knights coordinating on the kingside, and black's king suddenly feeling very exposed with the e-file open. You don't need all four factors. 2 or 3 strong ones are usually enough. Not all intuitive sacrifices are violent attacks against the king. One of the most sophisticated is the positional exchange sacrifice, giving up a rook for a bishop or knight to gain long-term positional dominance. In this rich middle game, white might play rook takes d6. That's a rook for a bishop, a material loss of about 2 points. But look at what white gets. The bishop that was on d6, a strong defensive piece, is gone. White's knight on d4 becomes an absolute monster with no challenger. The bishop on c4 dominates the a2-g8 diagonal. And most importantly, black's position loses its coordination. The rook that was on d6 was a defender. Without it, the pieces don't work together as well. Tigran Petrosian, the 9th world champion, was the master of the exchange sacrifice. He would give up a rook for a minor piece and then slowly suffocate his opponent over the next 40 moves. The exchange sacrifice requires immense positional judgment. You're not looking for a checkmate. You're looking for a position where your minor pieces dominate the board so completely that the extra rook has nothing useful to do. When you can feel that a rook is less valuable than the structural and positional advantages you gain, you've reached a deep level of chess understanding. In the engine era, you might think intuitive sacrifices would disappear. If a computer can evaluate every position, why would anyone sacrifice without full calculation? But the opposite has happened. Modern top players deliberately create irrational positions precisely because engines have made equal positions almost impossible to win. When both players follow engine recommendations, the game often ends in a draw. So the modern approach, championed by players like Hikaru Nakamura, Alireza Firouzja, and Wei Yi, is to create chaos. Play openings that lead to imbalanced positions. Accept structural weaknesses in exchange for dynamic compensation. Sacrifice pawns to open lines and activate pieces. The goal is to reach a position that no engine preparation could have covered, where the player with better intuition, better nerve, and deeper understanding of dynamic positions will prevail. This is the paradox of the computer age. Computers have made chess more calculated, but they've also pushed humans toward less calculable positions. The players who thrive are those who can evaluate irrational positions accurately, who can sense when compensation is sufficient even when the computer isn't there to confirm it. That skill, the ability to navigate chaos, is perhaps the most valuable in modern Grandmaster chess. So when should you trust your instincts, and when should you rely on calculation? The answer depends on the type of position. In concrete, forcing positions where every move is a check, capture, or direct threat, you should calculate. These positions have a limited number of critical moves, and finding the right sequence is possible with careful analysis. But in complex, non-forcing positions where there are many reasonable moves and the consequences unfold over 10 or 20 moves, calculation fails. Nobody can calculate 20 moves deep with multiple branches at every point. This is where instinct takes over. Instinct is not magic. It's pattern recognition built from thousands of games studied and played. When you've seen 100 attacking positions with a bishop pointing at f7, a queen ready to swing to the kingside, and a pawn storm advancing, your brain recognizes the pattern before your conscious mind can calculate it. Your instinct says, this must be good. And it's usually right. The practical rule, if you can calculate to a clear conclusion, do it. Never sacrifice on instinct when calculation is possible. But if the position is too complex to calculate fully, and your experience tells you the compensation looks promising, trust it. Play the sacrifice. Enter the forest. The player who never takes risks never wins brilliantly. Let's make intuitive sacrifices practical with a 5-question checklist you can use in your games. Before playing a sacrifice, ask yourself these 5 questions. 1. Will my pieces become significantly more active after the sacrifice? 2. Will the enemy king become exposed or lose its pawn shelter? 3. Will I maintain the initiative, meaning my opponent must respond to my threats on every move? 4. Does my opponent lack coordination, with pieces that cannot easily help each other? 5. Is the position too complex for my opponent to defend accurately in a practical game? If 3 or more answers are yes, the sacrifice is likely sound in practice. In this position, white might consider sacrificing on d5 with e takes d5 or c takes d5 followed by piece play toward the center and kingside. The bishop on b2 becomes a monster on the long diagonal. The queen on c2 can pivot to the kingside. The pieces work together beautifully. Run through the checklist. Will pieces become more active? Yes, dramatically. Will the king be exposed? Potentially, if lines open toward g7. Will you maintain initiative? Yes, multiple threats emerge. Is the opponent uncoordinated? Their knight on d7 and bishop on d6 are congested. Is it too complex to defend? Likely yes. 4 out of 5. Sacrifice with confidence. Let's close with Tal's most famous quote, "I don't study chess. I study my opponent." Tal understood that chess is played between two humans, not two engines. Your opponent has limits. They get tired. They get nervous. They make mistakes under pressure. An intuitive sacrifice exploits all of this. It says, "I believe this position is too complex for you to defend." And more often than not, Tal was right. Here's what to take from this lesson. First, learn to evaluate compensation. Practice identifying initiative, activity, king safety, and structural factors in every position you study. Second, build your pattern library. The more attacking positions you've seen, the better your instincts become. Study Tal's games. Study Kasparov's sacrifices. Study Shirov's creative brilliancies. Third, have the courage to sacrifice. The worst that can happen is you lose a game. But you'll learn from it, and the next time a similar pattern appears, your instinct will be sharper. Fourth, use the 5-question checklist. It turns vague feelings into a structured evaluation. And fifth, remember that chess is a game of 2 results in sharp positions. The attacker usually has the easier task. Enter the deep dark forest. Your opponent might not find the way out. Intuitive sacrifices remind us that chess is not just a game of calculation. It is a game of judgment, pattern recognition, and courage. You don't need to see everything to the end. You need to evaluate compensation correctly, initiative, piece activity, king safety, and pawn structure. When your pieces are swarming, when the enemy king has no shelter, when your opponent must find a series of only moves to survive, trust the sacrifice. As Tal taught us, in a complicated position, the advantage goes to the braver player.